kitchen
Wait.
in Austin,
Okay,
Texas.
we're live. We're here. We're on Think Tech Talks. Welcome. I'm Jay Fidell. We're going to talk about continuity of service in Hawaii, and you'll know more about that term in a minute. And we're talking with Mike Farrell, retired Coast Guard officer. There he is, who is expert in this area, having spent a career in the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard deals, at least in some significant sense these days, with continuity of service. And what do we mean by that? Suppose you have a disaster, and they happen, then the idea is to keep the community going, keep all those vital services operating. The Coast Guard knows how to do that. Mike knows how to do that. And the important thing is planning to do it so that when the eventual catastrophe happens, you're not caught flat-footed, because that is dangerous business. Anyway, welcome to the show, Mike.
Well, thank you, Jay.
Nice to see your smiling face.
We haven't seen each other in a long time.
Yes, it's true. You have to come back here once in a while. You were assigned here for years. You were the commander of the Coast Guard Air Station at Barbers Point, was it?
No, I was the XO out there.
It's all the same.
That was a really good time.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to coming back.
Okay. Well, we are looking forward to having you back. I hope it's soon. I wanted to ask you, where are you now?
I'm currently living in Austin, Texas. I work for the state of Texas right now.
Okay.
Doing similar things, continuity of operations.
Okay, that makes you even more of an expert. So Mike is joining us from Austin, Texas by Skype, and we love to do Skype because we can talk to people all over the world, including Austin, Texas. So Skype, what is exactly the study of continuity of service? What does it mean?
Well, continuity of service or continuity of operations is what an organization wants to do or have a plan in place if things aren't working normally. It could be something, I think, as simple as what happens if I run out of gas in a car, or something as more complex as what happens if I can't live in my house for 2 weeks. And the way the government and commercial organizations do it, they look and try to see what are the essential services that we need to provide and what are our key services we need to provide, because sometimes essential is misused. What are the key services we need to provide, and how are we going to provide those services if there's something abnormal goes on?
That sounds like an awful lot of services. I'm thinking of our show recently with the director of transportation services here, and talk about how the city, as a matter of its customary jurisdiction, this city and every city, has police, fire, sewage, roadways and transportation, lighting, power, so forth. Right. All of these things are essential elements of the life of the community, and it's not that you can afford to lose any of them. You need them all to survive. So it seems to me, I'm naive about this, but it seems to me that if you're talking about continuity of service or operations, you're really talking about all those things, all those city services at least, to keep the community, functioning.
You're absolutely right, Jay. Is one of the things that is very complicated about that is how the interaction of all the services come in. You talk to the transportation person in transportation. Well, if you have an earthquake and it destroys a road, well, how are you going to provide transportation services, or can cars get around? Well, not only can't cars get around, the buses can't get around, the trucks can't get around. You may not be able to have fire and police respond in a timely manner, or you may have to forward deploy or put in another location some of your fire trucks, ambulance, and police. So it does get very complicated. Governments and hospitals and large corporations usually have fairly complicated continuity of operations plans, and it becomes kind of a dance, I would say, an interaction where you may have one function take the lead or one office take the lead, but all the other ones have to be able to follow that lead and be able to work together to accomplish the mission.
Well, that certainly suggests to me that there's an big issue about leadership, and that at the moment of the disaster, somebody has to step forward and say, "Follow me, boys. I'll tell you how these things are coordinated, and I'll be in charge. I'll make sure they all happen and it all works together." And it also strikes me that is a hard piece to plan That's political, and a lot of communities probably never get to that. Am I right?
I wouldn't say a lot of communities never get to it, but it can be a very hard piece to plan. FEMA has uses the integrated command structure system, and what you have is usually you probably remember from your Coast Guard days there, Jay, that the first person on scene takes control of the scene in any kind of a case. Well, it's very similar in any kind of emergency. It could be the fire chief that arrives on scene and he controls the situation. It could be the police chief. It could be the police officer in the police car. But what happens is it's scalable and expandable, and it goes out to handle the initial emergency. Once the initial emergency comes in and is being taken care of, then they look at various other aspects of how to deal with this emergency. And it does get very complicated. There's one command. It could be a unified command in ICS structure, which basically means there are multiple entities working together, and so it can be very complicated. But usually, in the beginning, there's usually a pointy end of the spear, as you want to say, or one head that directs everything that's going on. And I would say in the state of Hawaii, it's probably somebody. It could be somebody from the governor's office, or it could be somebody from FEMA who's going to spearhead a lot of the things that go on.
Well, I mean, on that point, I just wonder. I can't tell you. I'm just a member of the public. I can't tell you who it is. And if some fella stopped me on the street in the time of an emergency and said, "My name is Joe Dokes, and you should listen to me," I would have no way of knowing whether he was serious. So, wouldn't it be appropriate then and useful for somebody to give us all notice in advance that that guy, Joe Dokes, is going to be coordinating all this?
Well, I do believe, and I did look it up, is you have I believe Primo is one of the organizations in Hawaii, which is the Pacific Risk Management Ohana.
Uh-huh.
And that's one of the places I think you can look. You can also look in FEMA, look at the local region out there. The governor's office generally has a Department of Public Safety or an equivalent office like of that. And a lot of times, if you're talking local in the communities, the fire chief is usually trained in the initial response, and they are usually trained in everything from fires to hazardous material spills, to other car disasters, trucks, big spills on the highway, and those kind of events. So you may not know who it is, but usually they show up on scene and they know and they take control of the scene. In the integrated command structure, if they're doing it the same way they do everywhere else, he's usually the guy in the white shirt or the white vest, and it says in the back, it says Incident Commander.
Look for epaulets.
Well, yeah, and you laugh, but it's very much your question is very much what goes on is I show up on scene, and who am I supposed to take? Who's going to tell me what to do?
Yeah.
And on a complicated scene, they're checking there's places where you check in, there's rosters you keep, that you check out. It's a complicated operation, but it's been fairly well defined through FEMA and the integrated command structure to make it much less difficult, and it's not ad hoc. And that's what you usually get in problems when you have an ad hoc. You try to make an ad hoc plan to start in how to control a situation.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, part of that leadership issue is command communications. I mean, it's one thing for the little message to scroll across your TV set and say, there's a flood in Nu'uanu Valley or whatever, and that happens every now and then. Or that, there's something that of consequence to everyone. Bad weather is probably the most frequent, example of that. But the other kind of communication that I'm thinking of is the communication among the people charged with continuing operations. And if you don't have that, the guy on top really can't give instructions, and the people, at lateral positions in the structure, they won't be able to coordinate. So how important is that, and how do you assure that you will have command communications in times of emergency?
Well, I can't speak specifically to Hawaii. What I can tell you is in the other jurisdictions I've been in, they're usually run through the organization's command structure. And interoperability is a big key. I know the federal government, working with state and local governments, is trying to ensure communications interoperability so that the law enforcement and the fire department and the responders can all talk on a common frequency. But as you know, is if you've got 100 responders, which is not unusual in a medium-sized to a large-sized event, they can't all be on the same radio. So you got to have discrete frequencies. So that's really what happens is you use the chain of command or the command structure so that the incident commander relays it to his operations chief, and the operations chief then relays it out what needs to get done. And the planning gets done and it gets relayed. But communications is a very big part. And that's in some of the other jurisdictions. I know here in Texas, I know when I was out in Oregon, they have a communication van. And the communication van a lot of times has in it both air frequencies, land frequencies, and sometimes both frequencies. So they can, inside the van, you can have a portable communication center where they can talk to everybody.
Yeah.
I also know that the amateur radio, local amateur radio groups, they also run communications. Now, while they're not, they relay information and they actually come on scene and assist if requested. So there's ways that you can talk, let's say inter-island, if you have power loss, that they come out with generators and they can talk over HF or the amateur radio frequencies and talk back and forth to each other. The other thing that's very important these days sometimes is secure communications. And so that's why they have some discrete frequencies. And in some places they try to, and sometimes it's very difficult. As you know, we're Skyping. So in theory, you can have somebody on Skype talking to the world and relaying the information faster than the man who's running it can find the information out.
Yeah. You know, I can't resist thinking about that tragic footage of the fire department in the ground floor of the Twin Towers on 9/11, and how they were unable to communicate with some of their people up in the stairwells.
Right.
And of course, that's predictably difficult because the stairwells are all encased in concrete and steel, and it's not likely that shortwave is going to get through them. But I suppose it points up the idea that you need to have equipment that will work even if you don't have power. You need to have equipment that will work in the location you need it to work. And if you're going to rely on it in stairwells, then you have to have something that will work in stairwells and so forth. So it seems to me that this has got to be a critical piece on the ground to be able to talk to the people who are supposed to be doing what you need to do, and that you have to have equipment and a plan to use it. No?
Absolutely, and most of the large organizations, and I would dare say, I'd be very surprised if both the fire department and the police departments in Hawaii don't test these systems regularly. Mm-hmm. So they're going to be testing their systems. They're going to be testing the radios. They usually have backup systems and how they're going to communicate. And at the very least, they have runners, and they'll go between pieces. And this is, Jay, what we're talking about is all based on the initial incident. So if something initially happens, we also, one of the things that we have to be very careful of, and they saw it in the Boston bombing, is that if you have something going on, everybody rushes to their cell phone and quickly overloads the cell circuits. What they're finding out is text messages go through faster because they're using different bandwidth, not using the same bandwidth as voice, and bandwidth is not quite the right word. But you're going to have problems that way. That's why most of your responders all carry portable radios, and they'll set up base stations, and they'll be able to communicate that way, and they'll have some frequencies on there. So it's been tested, and they train in it regularly. So it's not you're not going to have an ad hoc system, as I said before. It's not going to be something that just shows up. And you're going to have an emergency communications van. They'll be able to talk on a lot of frequencies. Mm-hmm. So they have this pretty well at hand.
Okay. I want to take a short break, Mike, but when we come back, I'd like to set up a case study with you of a hypothetical emergency and have it sort of unfold on how these organizations work together and what they do in order to hold the continuity together for that community so that things don't collapse. Okay. That's Mike Farrell, a retired Coast Guard officer, joining us by Skype from Austin, Texas. This is Think Tech Talks. I'm Jay Fidell. We're talking about continuity of services in Hawaii. We'll be right back.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live. This is Think Tech Talks. I'm Jay Fidell. We're talking about continuity of service in Hawaii, and that means continuity of service in times of emergency and disaster. With Mike Farrell, a retired Coast Guard officer, who does this kind of thing, who did this kind of thing for the Coast Guard, and who does this kind of thing now for the government of the state of Texas. He joins us by Skype from Texas. So, Mike, let's set up a case study here and say, let's talk about Oahu. Let's set up a hurricane, because we're in climate change, and every day of good weather brings us closer to a day of really, really bad weather. So let's say there's a hurricane, and we have the same kind of experience that Kauai had a few years ago with Iniki or Eva, and roofs are coming off, and cars are being pushed around, and nobody can go to work, and everything is gummed up. So I give you that. That's my gift to you. Tell me what happens and what we do.
Well, I think the first thing that happens is that usually you get a warning. Hurricanes are known entities. They just don't show up like a tsunami or an earthquake. So you would have, usually the governments have 96-hour notice or greater, and they'll have a plan in place. They'll have a plan in place where they'll either reposition assets or tools. So let's say it's going to hit the south side, and it's predicted the eye is going to come right over Honolulu International, right? Mm-hmm. Honolulu International hit Pearl Harbor. So now we've got all kinds of problems and things that people are thinking about. Some of the things that go on 96 hours before or more is, that you have Honolulu, you've got the Navy base right there, you've got big naval housing areas, you've got Iroquois Point on the other side. They're all at sea level, and you've got thousands of people living there. So they may have to evacuate. DOD might take initial response, but they don't have enough places to put them. Schofield Barracks only has so much room. They may set up tents up there and some evacuation centers for the DOD folks, but there may be other places that need to go. You also out in Ewa Beach, you have the hospital out there, and you have and in Kapolei, which is, I think they call that the second city there, Jay. Mm-hmm. You'll have people out there that have to move, and let's not forget Disney. They'll have all kinds of things that have to happen with there. Mm-hmm. So there'll be all preparations made. You need to evacuate, where it's going to hit, what do we think, how big a storm surge you're going to get, and that's usually where a lot of damage comes from, the storm surge. Mm-hmm. So you've got the marinas. What are going to happen with all the boats? So people start trying to plan these things. Depending upon where it hits and how it hits, you can have the marina all on the H1 or Kapiolani Boulevard, or now H1's probably unusual, but you can have boats coming up on Pearl Harbor and coming up on the land and coming up in Diamond Head and Waikiki Beach, mm-hmm. making it over the coral reef out there and ended up on the beach. So now you have to worry about, these boats have fuel, what's it doing to the water? You also have the offshore fueling station off Barbers Point. Presumably there'll be no boats on there, and that'll be look at that. And then you have people you may or may not have to rescue. Your local, the Honolulu Police Department has helicopters, the Coast Guard has helicopters, the Navy and Army both all have helicopters. So, and the Marines, I believe, have helicopters. So what you have is you'll have a concerted effort to do search and rescue and initial response. You may have people that stayed in the hospital out at Ever Beach. You may have a problem with the Queens Hospital, and then they may be medevacing people back and forth. Your roads may or may not have debris. If you go, when I went through Yugo in '89 in the Virgin Islands, that was very similar. It tore all the roofs off and tore all the leaves off the trees, tore wires down, pushed cars, like you said, into streets. Boats were stacked up in harbors. There was hotels, windows were all blown out of hotels. So you'll have a lot of people that are going to need services. And how are they going to get those services? Usually the 96 hours before, when it's going to hit, the city and the governments try to take care of the people. And the hotels and the businesses will try to take care of people. They'll stockpile water, toilet paper, rice, probably get malasadas there for you too, because you like the malasadas, Jay. And maybe a couple of plate lunches to hang on to. And then they'll go to try to take care of the people there. And then it becomes, how are we going to move people from place to place?
Yeah.
You have to let the hurricane hit, and you may plan for it all, but it's not going to go exactly according to plan. So there's going to be a little bit of improvisation in that, okay, we now have this situation, now how are we going to respond? Usually what happens in these events is they take care of the safety and life are the first priorities. So they're going to make sure people are safe, are in a good place, that you're going to try to get them water, you'll try to restore power to certain locations and maybe shelters and the like, because you're not going to be able to restore power all across the island. Now we talk about the people. People in the area cannot expect that the government is going to be able to take care of them for at least the first 48 hours. Because the 24 to 48 hours after, the government's reconstructing itself, trying to figure out what it can do, where it can operate out of, and taking care of the most critical people first.
So it's putting the government assets in place. That's the most critical priority. You know what it's like? It's like when they say when you're flying on a plane and the oxygen masks come down, first take the mask for yourself and then for your child, because you're the one who's going to save the child. It's the same thing here. The government has to get in place first.
Absolutely correct. Because one of the things that you don't have is that if the hurricane hits and let's say it comes up, Pearl Harbor, your airport's right on the water. Did it push some of those boats onto the runway? So now you got bulldozers bulldozing the boats off to the side. Are any of the airplanes damaged? Are they damaged the fuel farms at the airport? Are they contaminating the fuel farms at the airport? Some of the things I think that you have that governments are worrying about, and I know the National Park Service worries about it, is if you get a hurricane come through, what's happening to the Arizona Memorial? It still has a lot of fuel on board. It's a national monument. There's a lot of sensitivities go on with that. So you just, for instance, that, and so you have a lot of pieces that go into play, and a lot of people are going to interoperate and go for the outcome.
Yeah, I can imagine pandemonium. I can imagine people going in every which direction, and I mean, holding it together, coordinating the pieces, making sure that people don't break and run or do panicky things. This is not easy, and this requires a second level of communication, namely the communication with the people on the street, from the rescue agencies, whoever they are, to the average guy on the street or at home. What do you tell them? That has to be operating, or I think you lose control of the community.
Well, absolutely. Is what happens in any of these kind of incidents is they usually set up a joint information center, and they coordinate the message that's going out. They take care of those emergency frequencies. That's why when they talk about for your home kit that you have a battery powered radio that has AM and FM on it. And there's some that even have hand cranks on it so you can recharge the battery. And they also have flashlights with hand cranks that can recharge the battery. And yes, in our house we have both of those. So I do try to practice some of what we talk about. Mm-hmm. But you'll be talking about things that security is going to be key. Will they call out? Will the government use the National Guard to maintain security, and not do police action, but just maintain security around places? If you have wires down, you have boats in places, you have fuel oils, and all these other kinds of oils that come from cars and boats and damaged houses and the like. you need to keep the people safe, and that's usually what happens is they'll set up safety perimeters and they'll keep people out of places because it's not safe to be there because they may be down power lines. And that in turn goes back to, you're lucky out there, Jay, because you're on a tropical island. You didn't have the ice storm like we had today that knocked out some power in places, and then you're going, okay, do I have my fireplace and my gas stove?
It's just another element of climate change, Mike.
Yeah. well, I know this isn't what you want to talk about, but our Vicky and my wife Vicky and our Y2K plan, and the whole world is going to come to an end.
Yeah.
That's when we got orders to Hawaii, so we were going to spend it on Hawaii, and we were hoping the whole world came to an end, so we just stay in Hawaii for the Y2K. But unfortunately, they had it figured out before it happened, so there wasn't that much of a battle. But you do, if you remember 9/11, we were living out at Iroquois Point, and the planes stopped running for 3 days.
Uh-huh.
And so it got very quiet. But you have to, one of the things that I know is that Hawaii is an island, and everything comes in by boat or by plane. When we were living in Puerto Rico and the hurricanes came through, similar, everything came in by boat or by plane. So the military is bringing foodstuffs and other supplies in to meet the initial requirements, and then you're trying to get the harbor back up. You know, what was in the harbor, what was tied up, is Matson still good? Are there all these other pieces in Hawaii that need to play out so that we can, in turn, make things happen correctly?
Well, that's the thing about food. I mean, I think, as you have expounded on this, each one of these services in our discussion of continuity of service has to be looked at separately and then together. And food is a big one. The old story, people always mention it, is that McDonald's has a 60-day supply of food here, but nobody else does. And since everyone knows that, in the case of some catastrophe, everybody will be running down to McDonald's, and that 60-day supply of food will last for 6 hours, and then there won't be food anywhere. And so the question is, where in the plan for continuity of service, does food fit? And my reaction to what you were saying is that I'm not sure that big shipping companies are going to have a plan. I guess the government's going to have a plan, and in the plan is going to be food. Since it's a disaster, and there's no food here because there is no significant agriculture, I wish there were, then airplanes will have to ship food into the state on an emergency basis. This is an airlift. I mean, this sounds like Berlin, lots of planes, lots of immediate, lots of organizational stuff. And it won't be the commercial interests who do it. It'll be the government causing the commercial interests to do it. The plan, to the extent there is one, is a plan by government rather than industry. Isn't that true?
Well, partially so, I think. I think what you're going to find is that it may hit Oahu. So what you'll have Pearl Harbor, but the Navy Exchange and the commissary there may still be intact. The one out of Kaneohe may still be intact. All your Times supermarkets. I'm trying to think who else is out there. Forgive me, but they will all work in concert to get food to certain places. Now you also have the other islands, and while they may not be able to feed 800,000 people for 2 weeks. They may be able to feed 800,000 people for 72 hours if it gets shipped over. Mm-hmm. You'll also have, and you guys are kind of lucky because it may be part of the plan, it may not be, but I couldn't tell you. And I haven't looked at your plan. But you also have the Navy base, the Army base, and you've got the Marines up there. They generally have, especially the Navy, they've got ships that are self-contained that have food and food stores and the like. So there may be a lot of sharing that goes on. It's whatever the trip takes to go from the West Coast to Hawaii. That's when large amounts of food are going to be transferred. You're going to get a lot. You're going to want to know if you can drink the water. Hawaii is very lucky with all the water that they have. Water's probably not going to be a real big problem in Hawaii in You may not have everything you want. You may not be able to shower, but it'll probably not be a real big problem.
Yeah. Well, water raises the other thing. This actually came up once. You can't have water without water pressure, and you can't have water pressure without electrical power and electricity. And so that, this all sort of comes together on, do you have electrical power, and
Sure.
and how does the lack of electrical power affect the services you need to continue? And it gets to be pretty complicated.
Well, it sure does. But here's where we talk about the essential services. Is what are the essential services? I'll bet you if you go to Queens Hospital, they have an emergency generator there, and it's fueled up for be able to run for, let's say, 72 hours, because that's what they figure it's going to take 48 hours to get more fuel deliveries, and they padded it to go on. You take any of the pumping stations and the power stations, may very well be ways and shapes and forms to bring portable generators to those so they can start pumping water and get the water moving. So this is one of the things that I think you need to understand, everybody needs to understand, is that there's very smart people, much smarter than me, who have thought about these things and have these plans in place. So we shouldn't be too worried. What I would dare say is what I'm more concerned about is I'm more concerned about you, Jay. I'm more concerned that where you live, if you get cut off from going to Times Supermarket, how are you going to make sure that you can get your rice and malasadas,
Right. Well, I want to take another break, Mike.
Sure.
When we come back, I'd like to address how the individual person handles this and how that person interacts with the government or whatever authorities are responsible for continuity of service. We're going to take 1 minute off. This is Mike Farrell, retired Coast Guard officer, also involved in continuity of service planning in the state of Texas. He joins us from Austin by Skype. This is Think Tech Talks. I'm Jay Fidell. We'll be right back. Aloha, I'm Jay Fidell. This is Think Tech Hawaii, broadcasting live from the Pioneer Plaza in downtown Honolulu. We raise public awareness about tech, energy, and globalism in Hawaii. Technology is critical to our state. A vibrant tech sector will give us new prospects in the global marketplace and will offer great careers and make our economy more resilient. Streaming live on Ustream and Spreaker, ThinkTech allows its hosts and guests invaluable opportunities to report important events and discuss important questions, and to be heard here in Hawaii and around the world. You can find links to our live streams on thinktechhawaii.com or on our mobile website, m.thinktechhawaii.com. And you can see our archive on YouTube. It's all just a click away. We want to do whatever we can to keep Hawaii relevant, connected, and thriving in the complexity of the 21st century. We hope you will help us in those efforts. Tune in today. This is Think Tech. I'm Jay Fidell. Mahalo. Okay, we're back. We're live. We're at Think Tech Talks. We're talking about the continuity of service planning in Hawaii and elsewhere with Mike Farrell, retired Coast Guard officer and a planner in the state of Texas, who joins us by Skype from Austin, Texas. So, Mike, turning for a moment to the individual citizen who, is very concerned about this. He's going to be into self-interest and surviving with his family. He's going to want to protect his castle, so to speak. What does he do? Does he go out and buy a 45, fill his bathtub with water, lock the doors? What does he do to deal with an emergency where services, the continuity of services is threatened?
Well, I know you've gone through, let me back up. I think some of the things you said are absolutely right. The local authorities will usually give you some way, shape, or form. FEMA has on its website a list of things of how to do disaster preparedness. And part of that is do you have 3-day supply of food? Do you have a 3-day supply of water? Hawaii is known for everybody doing a lot of stuff outside. So do you want to buy some charcoal briquettes? Mm-hmm. And you say, what? So you can cook. If you have to boil water, you can boil water out on a barbecue grill just as easy as you can on your electric stove in the house. Mm-hmm. So there's things that you start thinking about is how am I going to be able to provide services for my family? And then you also say, how am I going to be able to protect my family? Well, if you're not in exactly the zone, as they'll tell you, talk about shutters on windows. Home Depot may run out of plywood because everybody's buying plywood. You're going to make the preparations for your family. And the local authorities, the local emergency authorities, will usually give you what you kind of think you should have. And they usually have them on their websites. So my recommendation is you go to the website now and you see what they say that you should have. I said a little bit about a hand crank radio and a hand crank flashlight. And those are a couple of the things that generally help you, because why? Because the government will communicate with you over the radio.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be able to tell you what's going on. They might be able to tell you what roads are open. So let's talk about your house for a little bit. Did you put plywood on the windows? Did you lose windows? Are you worried about the rain coming in? Do you have a safe place to go in the house if you're going to shelter in place?
Mm-hmm.
So where would you go? Down here in Texas, we have tornadoes, and they talk about being able to go to a room with no windows. And we have a place. We're kind of like Harry Potter. We go into the stairs. So we have a place under the stairs where we're going to go if the tornado comes through, because there's no basements here.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have I don't have a storm cellar. So we're going to do that. And you talk about filling your tub with water. You may want to fill your tub with water. That may be something useful, because you're going to need water to wash. You're going to need water to clean dishes. You may need things like that you're not going to want to use bottled water for.
Yeah, well, let me add one thing. You probably, before you fill the tub, you probably want to wash the tub out. Just a thought.
Yeah, so you want to make a couple of preparations, and that's probably a good plan too. You can fill pots up with water. You want to make sure that you follow the list of things that they have, and some of them are very. You might think, and I know last time Matson went on strike, all the rice and all the toilet paper left the shelves of the supermarkets, and there's a reason for that. Those are some of the necessities you're going to need. You want to have a set of batteries. You want to generally have a change of clothes. You probably want to have clothes that are good for the rain. You may want to make sure you've got a sweatshirt or a sweater somewhere, because you know as well as I do, it gets cool in the mountains at night in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
So you might not get ice storms, but it's going to get cool. It could get into the high 60s, and if you're wet and cold, it's just miserable.
What about moving around, Mike? What about getting in my car where the radio works, and moving to another location? It sounds to me like you could do that. And maybe there's a benefit in it sometimes, but there's also a big risk in it. What's the general approach to dealing with the need or the possibility for moving your location in the middle of a disaster?
Well, you run into a couple things. One is, during the 96 hours before the disaster, I'm hoping that you filled up the tanks on your car, make sure it had oil, and there were air pressure in the tires. Because if you try to drive it around, even though Hawaii's not that big, I have sat on the H1 for an hour or so you want to have gas to do that. And you can imagine that if people are moving, there's going to be lots and lots of traffic.
Yeah, going nowhere, burning up gas.
That's right. But one of the things that I think is very important that you bring up, Jay, and I'm glad you did, is you really shouldn't be moving around without a plan. And usually the plan is given to you by somebody in some way, shape, form that's controlling the situation. Now, I know that you may have family on the island, and you're going to want to make sure they're okay, and you want to do that. But I wouldn't move around till the government, and I know this is kind of a bad word, but till the government tells you it's okay to move around. Why? They have emergency services, and they're trying to restore services. So a lot of traffic going back and forth only can cause problems. And if you do have a problem with your car and a lot of traffic, you might have to leave it, or you might have to push it off to the side of the road. And then you're just causing problems for emergency vehicles and other people moving around.
Well, this raises a whole thing about your mindset. And your mind, you have to avoid being only self-interested. I mean, to me, that would be sort of a natural reaction. I'm only interested in myself, my situation. I want to protect myself and my family and my property.
Sure.
But if you do that, then you run the risk of ignoring instructions from the government that would benefit the community in general. So I think the proper mindset, you can correct me or not, the proper mindset is you have to surrender some of those thoughts to listening to the government. You have to be part of the community, so to speak, that listens to the government. Otherwise, if you run off on your own, you're likely to put yourself at greater risk, and in any event, make it more difficult for the government to continue services.
Well, absolutely. But I think you in Hawaii, I guess you have a very strong tradition of ohana, which is you're generally all in it together, your whole family, right?
Well,
so,
who knows how that works exactly when you have an emergency?
Well, but it's better than what I'm getting at is I think you have a lot of that mindset there now. That I think the people are going to say, how are we good? What is good for not just for me, but what's good for the community and my family? And while it may be painful to sit here and not be able to talk to my cousin, who I haven't talked to in 2 days, and my cell phone battery died, and their cell phone battery isn't or their cell phone isn't working. It's okay if you made the preparations and they made the preparations. Going out and trying to find them isn't going to do anybody any good.
Yeah.
And it'll probably just be more detrimental to you because now you'll be driving around in places where you may or may not be able to go. Neighborhoods may be blocked off. Streets will be blocked off.
You make yourself a victim that needs to be rescued.
That's right.
And you're taxing the system. Yeah.
Yes, and you're becoming part of the problem and not part of the solution.
Yeah. One thing we have 6 minutes left, Mike, and I wanted to ask you, see if we could discuss this a little bit, is about how real is this? I mean, we've been talking about a case study. We've been talking about making plans and trying to envision the not the worst case analysis, but the I want to call it a realistic, set of circumstances that we need to deal with. But here we are, and we live in a world of terrorism. We live in a world of more and more unpredictable weather with climate change. We live in a world of tsunamis that could happen. Look at Fukushima. Who would have anticipated what happened? And so all kinds of things could happen. I mean, even if you withdraw electrical power, you don't know what's going to happen to the social fabric of the community, especially in an island. It could get dicey. And so I guess what I'm asking is, when you make these plans, when the public hears about these plans, when the public contemplates the possibility on an island like Oahu, like any of the islands in the Hawaiian Islands, I mean, how realistic is it to worry about this? Should we worry about this? Is this inevitable, or is this sort of pie in the sky where we should not be too concerned? And if we just, have a sort of Zen approach on it, it will all work out fine. How important is this planning right now?
Well, actually, I firmly believe right now it's very, very important to plan. One of the things that, as I tell people is, and somebody told me, so I'm not going to take credit for it, is you plan for the worst and hope for the best. Most of your governments are planning for the worst. They're planning for the hurricane to come through, knock out all electricity, knock the sewers out, take out half the infrastructure. Now, how are we going to survive, and what are we going to do? And most of the time, it doesn't go that bad. But those are the exercises you run in your plan. How important is it for you to have a plan in your house for fire plan if your house catches on fire? How important? And that's more likely to happen than a hurricane. And I think that most families should have a plan to do that. You have smoke detectors in your house. How often is your house going to burn down? Not a lot of houses burn down, but we all have smoke detectors. We have auto insurance. We carry life insurance. Hope to never use it. So what I think is that it's going to happen. The islands are going to be hit by something. It may not be right up the alley in Pearl Harbor. Maybe it's through Kaneohe. Maybe it's through Waianae. Or maybe it's on the north side and comes down Haleiwa Town. And now you've got, how are you going to respond and take care of people and have to go over the mountain to do things? And it may not be a big town. So it's very real. And I think you really do have to worry about how are you going to plan for it? And how are you going to respond? And if you do the planning, you then can respond better, and it's not nearly as panicky as if you didn't do any planning.
Yeah, I think the one thing is, it strikes me from this discussion, that Hawaii is different than Omaha, or Austin, for that matter.
Absolutely.
Because Hawaii is an island. I mean, all the islands are islands, and there's a natural barrier. So it's not, and I think people in their mind, they think, well, I'll just get in my car and I'll drive to the airport and I'll catch a plane out of here. I'll just leave. And I mean, I don't know if they think this actively, but I think it's almost like a subconscious thing. I'll just be able to leave the way I always leave. I go on my trips, whatever. But I don't think they fully realize that in the case of a disaster, you can't leave. And you have to live with whatever this thing is. You have to live with whatever system there is, whatever the government and the federal government, FEMA, have planned for the continuity of services and to bridge the gap until recovery, because you can't really go anywhere. A boat's not a good answer, and a plane is not a good answer. You got to stay here and live through it. And that's the difference I don't think people understand.
Well, I think you're right there, Jay. And I think one of the things that happened on the mainland that you don't get is when Katrina came through and hit in New Orleans, is that the population there was able to drive out and get away from far enough away, and then wait for it to go by, and then some people can come back. When you're on Oahu, there's only so many places you can go, and you can't fly everybody out to Kauai, and you can't fly everybody out to Maui if it doesn't look like it's going to hit there. So you do have to worry about sheltering in place. And how are you going to shelter in place? Well, you may have 96 hours of warning, or even more than that. You almost have to, as you talk about that, you almost may want to think about it's more like an earthquake. Is I got to be prepared for it to happen right away, because I'm not going to be able to go to Home Depot and buy all the lumber to shutter my windows, or make sure I've got enough, foodstuffs in the pantry, because everybody's going down to get the food now, because they say it's 96 hours out, and now we need to make sure we've got everything there. So you may want to look at your timeline and say, maybe it's not 96 hours. Maybe I need to worry about this stuff a week, 2 weeks in advance, because you'll get some notice that it might go there, and then that may be a way to look at it.
Well, the good news is that we have SOWEST. Mike, every Monday, yesterday included, we had the School of Ocean and Earth Sciences and Technology from UH Manoa come down here, and we talk to their researchers, and their researchers are more and more sophisticated about examining how it works in the Pacific, examining the waves, examining the temperatures, examining the weather, examining the ocean around us. And in terms of getting early warning systems, we really have a pretty sophisticated network of scientific systems that will give us that, what did you say, the 96 hours.
Right.
And I think we have a benefit in that, simply because we have UH Manoa and we have SOWEST, who does so many research projects. And I think we have to support them, and we have to connect them to the government, so the government and the people are fully aware if anything's coming down the pike. I think where it gets a little more problematic is in the case of possible terrorism, and who knows, I know this is a long shot, but missiles from Korea, North Korea, that kind of thing. I think it's more difficult to actually get a handle on when and whether that kind of thing might happen.
Well, and you're right, Jay. And one of the things that you mentioned is you do have the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center at UH there. And I know they do a lot of courses in disaster preparedness, and Hawaii is very involved in that. So I think the state of Hawaii is probably in pretty good stead there.
Okay, well, that means you have to come back soon, Mike.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, I'm ready. I have a glass of wine for you. Just walk in the door, okay?
All right, you got it.
Mike Farrell, retired Coast Guard officer, also involved in continuity of service planning in Austin, Texas, for the state of Texas, has joined us by Skype from Austin. This is Think Tech Talks. I'm Jay Fidell. We've been talking about continuity of service in Hawaii, and you may hear more about this going forward. In a moment, we're going to hear from Hung Jung, Asia in Review, here on Tuesday afternoon in the 4 to 5 block. Aloha, Mike.
Aloha.